U.S. says it's alarmed by reports that Russian mercenaries could be deployed to Mali to help fight a jihadist insurgency. Ghana's land borders remain shut to avert fourth COVID-19 wave. Plus, tensions rise in Tripoli as armed groups mobilize ahead of next week's election. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shiboale. The U.S. State Department says it's alarmed by reports that Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group could be deployed to Mali to help fight a jihadist insurgency. The Moscow-backed group is under U.S. and EU sanctions for destabilizing activities and rights abuses in Ukraine, Libya, Syria, and the Central African Republic. A State Department spokesperson said countries that experience Wagner Group deployments soon find themselves poorer, weaker and less secure. Mali is considering buying Russian mercenaries in preference to additional UN peacekeepers or French troops who currently assist the Malian armed forces. This is coming after French military forces left Timbuktu 9 years after they helped Malian troops recapture the city from Islamist insurgents. Joining us now for more on this is security analyst David Otto. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. What do you make of this call from the U.S. against Russian mercenaries helping Mali in fighting Islamist insurgents?
When it comes to counterinsurgency partnership, I don't think it is the position of the United States to prescribe which partner that Mali should engage with as far as its national security is concerned. I think the decision has to be that of Mali. They have to make a decision whether they want to bring in Russia or they want to bring in any so-called mercenaries affiliated with, the Wagner Group. What I think is more important here is to stress that the failure of France to reduce the number of or the degree of the insurgency after its presence in Mali for almost a decade is pushing the Malian government under the interim government of Assimi Goïta to look elsewhere, and I don't think entirely that should be something that the U.S. should make a decision on. Mali is not a state within the United States. I think Mali is a sovereign state, and therefore it can make its own decision whether it wants to bring in, any international partner to fight against insurgency, be it Russia or any other country.
And I think it's interesting, France's role in all of this. This is coming as French troops are reducing their numbers, like you mentioned. The forces have left Timbuktu 9 years after recapturing the city from jihadists. What impact now could this have on the overall fight against insurgency?
Yes, with what we have to significantly understand is that France is not leaving entirely. It is reducing its operation backing troops from about 5,000 to roughly about 3,000 troops. And again, of course, it's moving them from Timbuktu, which used to be the main headquarters of the French operation. Remember that some troops that were initially in Kidal and Tessal had also been reduced. But principally, most of these French troops will now be stationed in Gao, which is the triangle between the three countries of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. So, this is just a reduction. We have to be clear here. This is just a reduction of troops. It is not that France is leaving Mali entirely. What we have to remember is that there is also the European Union Operation Takuba, which France has a significant contribution. We shouldn't forget that France has an influence in the G5 Sahel coalition, it does also have a presence within the United Nations mission in Mali. Therefore, we cannot say that the reduction will have any significant impact because the 5,000 forces that France had brought before in 2013 haven't made any significant impact in reducing the capacity of the Islamic State of the Greater Sahel and the Al-Qaeda coalition in the region. I hope that we can see more of an increase in the capacity of Malian troops to be able to fight against the insurgency in their background.
With this reduction of French troops and now reports of Russians coming to help Mali, what role can we say those regional bodies have to play in this, in the security of Mali and even the Sahel? Or should this be left to Western allies?
I think what Mali principally needs to be focused on is to build its own internal capacity first, its ability to reduce the impact of the radicalization of young people into these extremist groups, its ability to use law enforcement to target the capacity of these jihadist groups, but also to protect critical infrastructure. Those are some of the areas that Mali needs to build on. But principally, I think Mali also has to work with its regional partners, especially countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, but more importantly, Nigeria, which has a significant experience in dealing with jihadist groups for more than a decade. So that regional collaboration has to be there. I don't know if ECOWAS, has any ability to engage, because of course they do not have, an army to send on the front line. But the role of, the African Union can be very significant here, rather than international partners. The international partners can play a supportive role, but when it comes to boots on ground, I think the best approach will be for Mali to lead these counterinsurgency operations with the help of its regional partners and supervised entirely by the African Union. This is the only way that we can fight insurgency from the African dynamics.
All right, then. Thanks a lot, David Otto. Meanwhile, the authorities in the Central African Republic appear to be whipping up anti-French sentiment following the decision by the EU to suspend its military training program. A march has been organized in the capital, Bangui, where local media say the flags of France and the EU will be set on fire. The EU says it acted because it believes the Russian mercenaries Wagner exert undue influence over the CAR's armed forces, and it fears it could get tied up in violations of international law. The country has been ravaged by years of civil war. Meanwhile, Central Africa continues to grapple with a worsening situation related to the COVID-19 pandemic, as vaccination campaigns in the sub-region have remained generally slow. Well, that's according to Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Central Africa, Francois Lunseni Fall. He's calling on the international community to continue supporting Central Africa in its efforts to contain the pandemic and mitigate its impact.
Central Africa has continued to grapple with a worsening situation related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Vaccination campaigns in the sub-region have remained generally slow and asymmetric. According to official data, as of 16 November, nearly 3% of people have been vaccinated across Central Africa. Meanwhile, 438,000 cases have been reported, including 7,047 who have lost their lives since the beginning of the pandemic. a 100% increase compared to the situation in June. I call upon the international community to continue supporting Central Africa in its effort to contain the pandemic and mitigate its impact. A strong ECAS is needed to help its member states address the many challenges facing Central Africa. These include, among others, terrorism and violent extremism, particularly in the Lake Chad Basin, maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea, the weak participation of women in peace and political processes, and the impact of climate change on peace and security.
And tension is rising in the Libyan capital Tripoli after armed groups mobilized in several districts ahead of next week's presidential election. Armed men surrounded the Prime Minister's office for several hours following the dismissal of a military commander. There is still uncertainty over whether the presidential vote due on the 21st of December will actually take place. The election is a key element of a UN-backed plan to try to bring political stability to Libya after a decade of unrest. Ghana's land borders will remain closed indefinitely to prevent a potential fourth wave of COVID-19 infections in the country. President Nana Akufo-Addo made the announcement in a national address. He says the government is monitoring the level of threat of the disease and ongoing vaccinations in neighboring countries before it can reopen borders. Residents in border towns have protested against the prolonged closure of Ghana's land borders that began when the pandemic broke out last year. Only transit cargo trucks are exempt from the border closure. Meanwhile, the Ghana Health Service has said that large quantities of COVID-19 jabs distributed in the southeastern Volta region have expired due to vaccine hesitancy. Ghana has so far administered 6.4 million doses out of the 17.7 million vaccines available in the country. And the authorities in Kenya have confirmed an outbreak of the influenza virus in the country. The Kenya Medical Research Institute said 4 out of 36 samples had tested positive. Doctors had noted an influx of patients with flu-like symptoms. The outbreak comes amid rising COVID-19 cases and the emergence of the Omicron variant. Health professionals are urging the public to follow strict hygiene guidelines to prevent the spread of the viruses. Still to come on the program. Fighting and climate change in central Somalia forces thousands to abandon homes. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Here in Nigeria, the Duchess of Cornwall, Her Royal Highness Camilla, has pledged support for Mirabel Center, the country's first sexual assault referral center and second in West Africa, for its laudable contribution to society. This comes as part of a roundup of activities marking this year's 16 Days of Activism, a campaign against gender-based violence, especially against women, with the theme Orange the World. Speaking at an event organized by the British High Commission in Lagos, Adriana Ling promised to make sure the needs of the centre are met. For the last 7 years, the Mirabel Centre has helped over 6,000 survivors of rape in Nigeria.
So I do want to just read out the letter from Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cornwall, that she's agreed to be the patron. As the proud patron of Mirabel, I very much wanted to send a message to everyone who is part of this centre. Over the last 7 years, you have helped more than 6,000 survivors of rape and sexual assault. You have restored women, men, and children to physical and emotional health, and you have done a huge amount to raise awareness across Nigeria of the heinousness of these crimes. I cannot express just how grateful I am to every single one of you for your invaluable work.
We are just here to basically drive that awareness and say we need support, one, for the centers that actually help survivors. Two, we need cooperation from partners so that perpetrators are prosecuted and that rape doesn't become like something that has come to stay and doesn't have like a way out of the country.
Somalia's former Deputy Prime Minister has been arrested in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland. Mohamed Omar Khalib was arrested at Hargeisa Airport and no reason was given. Mr. Khalib had been in the city for the past few months. The former Deputy Premier had been pardoned by Somaliland President Muse Bihi in October 2020 for opposing Somaliland's independence. He resigned as a member of Somalia's parliament in order to be able to visit his ailing father, who later died in Hargeisa. President Bihi recently issued an order banning people in the region from participating in the political activities of the Somali government and warned that those who dare to do so would not be pardoned. The International Committee of the Red Cross is warning that fighting and climate change in central Somalia is forcing thousands of people to abandon their homes. Communities in the Galgaduud region face a grim future as conflict and the growing climate crisis push thousands away in search of food, water and pasture.
More than 300,000 people have been affected by the worsening drought in Somalia's Galgaduud region. Last month, the federal government declared a state of emergency as thousands leave their homes in search of food, water and pasture. In addition to the worsening drought, Guril, a town of some 100,000 inhabitants in central Galgaduud, has seen an intensification of conflict. Intense shelling damaged several buildings in Guril, including its main hospital, the Kulmiye Community Hospital, the second largest in town, was destroyed in a fire. The hospital was a referral hospital that offered outpatient, inpatient, maternity and immunization services to people from surrounding villages up to 100 kilometers away.
To respond to their needs, we provided water through trucks to the displaced people in 17 villages. Also, people who lived in these areas have been affected by the clashes and also drought-affected communities.
Life is slowly returning to Guril, but many small businesses remain closed, and it will take time and effort to repair the damage, especially as the region grapples with the consequences of the drought.
The Special Representative of the Secretary General for South Sudan, Nicholas Haysom, has welcomed steps taken so far in implementing South Sudan's revitalized peace agreement, but he says they are not sufficient if the peace process is to be sustained. According to Mr. Haysom, the failure of the parties to reach an agreement on command ratios have promoted a fracturing of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, a political party and a rebel group that split from the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in 2013.
The steps taken so far in the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement are welcome. However, they are not sufficient if the momentum to realize peace is to be sustained. The failure of the parties to reach an agreement on command ratios have promoted a fracturing of the SPLM-AIO, and since my last briefing, mediation efforts that began in Khartoum, seeking to bridge the divide on Chapter 2 issues and to heal the SPLM-AIO split with its Kitgwang faction, have been undermined by the political crisis in Sudan. The President has announced that elections will be held in 2023. While I note that members of the Presidency are yet to coalesce around an electoral timetable, the next year presents a dramatic challenge if South Sudan is to complete its transition. It will require both technical and political preparations, including an agreement on the Constitution, as well as on the rules governing the election.
Meanwhile, thousands of people fleeing violence in Tambura, sheltering in an IDP camp in Nagero in Western Equatorial State, say they have nothing and lack basic services. In June, fighting broke out in Tambura County between the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, South Sudan's People's Defense Forces, forcing over 80,000 people to evacuate for safety.
The situation in the town of Nagero in Western Equatorial State is dire. People here have no access to clean water, food, hospitals, or schools for their children. Mother of 6, Joyce Peter, walked for 4 days to escape fighting in Tambora in early June, finding at least some form of safety in Nagero.
Some of my neighbors were killed, so I decided to run here with my children, leaving my husband behind. While staying here, we're starving. We have nothing, no medicine. Even water is a problem.
Visiting the region, retired Bishop Akanjelo Wanilemi says religious leaders from the South Sudan Council of Churches are standing in solidarity with the local community.
We have come that we may be able to not only listen to them but pray with them. We have come that we may restore hope, because people in this kind of situation who have left their homes, hopelessness seem to be looming, and so we have come to encourage them, and we've come to pray with them. We've come to give them a counsel and to advise them really to live in harmony with one another, and to seek peace as the best option, and dialogue as the best option, and just resonating with one another.
But for many, it's difficult to find hope in this situation. People here say they have nothing. Shelters are made of stakes tied together. The lucky ones have some thatching to provide shade from the searing sun. When the conflict began, the United Nations mission in South Sudan responded by establishing a temporary operating base in Tambora to provide a protective presence, deter violence, and build peace.
So for UNMISS, we continue to go to these communities. We continue to sensitize communities on peace. We continue to also, look at how they are living, what are their fears, what are those things that they think, can get them back to normalcy, and what are those things that they expect that the community, civil society, even UNMISS should do to help them, get back to normal life. So we continue to go to these areas to assure the communities, build their confidence, and then gradually also, they are beginning to get back.
The UN Peacekeeping Mission says it will continue to work in partnership with faith-based leaders and all other stakeholders to help these communities end the conflict and find peace so they can rebuild their lives and look forward to a better future. According to Amnesty International, a surge in clashes between rival armed groups aligned with government and opposition forces this year has killed dozens of civilians and unleashed unimaginable violence that could amount to war crimes.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shiboale. Bye for now.